friends. Welcome to the Ruth Simons podcast. Today, I want to talk about a question that's been on my mind for quite some time because it's something I wrestle through over and over again, season after season. It's kind of a perennial question for me is how do I sustainably keep a rhythm for creativity? So today I want to talk about what rhythms really help us stay creative. You don't have to be an artist. I happen to be a writer and a painter, but you don't have to be an artist or a musician or creative in some of those very, specific ways. Maybe you are trying to launch a business. Maybe you are trying to stay really engaged in your motherhood journey rather than checking out in your day to day. In every endeavor, you can kind of point to an area in which you have to stay creative or think on your feet or be a little bit more fruitful in ideas. And sometimes it just feels like, how do I stay in the creative zone? How do I actually keep bringing forth new ideas? I want to specifically talk about this from the perspective of being a producing artist. I am an artist, an author. I am in output mode really regularly. If you happen to be listening or watching today and you are a professional artist or a creative or a content creator or a musician, I can think of so many other areas in life where you might be asked to have creative output regularly. Um, you're going to resonate with this, I think, because this was on my mind because um, last fall I was in a season where the output was very, very demanding. It was super demanding because I had deadlines. So as a creative, you know, 13 years ago, I started Gracely's Shop, my art brand, my .com direct to consumer brand, as an e-commerce store. It had been a blog before that. And that was born out of, I think you guys have heard the story. I had $300 saved away. And I thought, well, this is the time. It feels like the right time to go take some of my paintings, go learn how to scan them and make prints and offer them to the world. Wasn't expecting for the artwork to go around the world or to turn into a much bigger brand than a little, um, shop at my kitchen table. I didn't expect to be published. I wasn't planning on any of those things at the time. But 11 years ago, when I had blogged for some time and everything I wrote and created came out of that like overflow of my daily life. I was writing out of overflow. I was writing and creating and thinking, um, because that was an outlet in my life. And then the art kind of came out of desiring to use what margin I had for the things that I love, like painting and drawing and learning watercolor. Did you know that I actually didn't even watercolor really up until that point and was teaching myself how to watercolor because watercolor dries faster. And in case we're new friends, I'm a mama to 6 boys. And so, my oldest now is 22. My youngest is now 11. But 11 years ago, I had a newborn baby um, and a 10-year-old essentially. And so, I mean, no, he would have been 11. I can do math. Um, and I was in the throes of being a mama and thought, okay, if I'm going to start a side hustle, it's got to be something that dries really, really fast. That's how I started watercoloring because my background was in oils and printmaking and acrylics and things that just took up a lot of space and needed a lot of supplies and didn't dry for a long time, especially with oils, I mean. So I tell you that story because I think for a lot of us, we create when there's a need and a desire and we find that we love what we do because we're doing it out of this like need to have an outlet and to express ourselves. I remember a time when I was like sewing things because I couldn't afford purchasing new drapes. So I would sew some, or I would sew a little cute apron and as a gift to a friend because it was just such a sweet outlet. It was a creative endeavor. I sometimes plated my food or did cake decorating because it was so enjoyable. And so here, fast forward 11 years later, and it's now my full time job. If we were having coffee or this was, a room full of creatives, I would literally be like, show of hands, can somebody share with me, like anybody else in this room start off loving and absolutely feeling like, oh my goodness, this could not possibly ever be a burden because I'm just creating, creating, creating because I love it so much. How many of us started there and then we find ourselves successful at doing that thing? And suddenly you realize you're not creating out of pleasure anymore or even out of overflow. You're on a deadline. You're producing to produce. I wouldn't say that that's 100% where I'm at. I just know that there are seasons. And I just went through a season where a lot of my creativity was forced through a tight little funnel of a deadline. Like, oh, here's where it has to, you literally have to be creative in a very specific way because we have to get the best of the best and it has to arrive here specifically. And there was not a lot of room because, when you're just being creative, it could be broad like this. It could be all over the place. And then you can find what you're aiming for through it. But when you're on a deadline and when you are producing because the demand or the productivity requires it, you suddenly find yourself really pressed to only do what is absolutely required, to do what's only necessary and do, for lack of a better way to put it, only what sells, right? I can think of a lot of ways in which this happens for a lot of creatives. You might be a musician and you really, really love a certain genre of music, but nobody's really into that particular genre and they're actually into something else. So you find yourself, I don't know who I'm talking about, but you find yourself only doing a certain style of pop music because you're not really that into it, but that's what is popular. Or um, I knew a friend once who loved painting other things, but her clientele basically only purchased one kind of painting she did. So she only did that particular style of painting over and over and over again because she's grateful. She's absolutely grateful to be selling that genre, that kind of painting. And it pays the bills and it's wonderful. And it's so lovely to be known for that. But what about all these other things that she's excited to do? Um, I can think about that. I think of that in terms of writing or creating, or some of us are on social media and maybe you're like, I'd so love to talk about this other thing, but my social media has now turned into like an outlet for one particular message. And if you listen to all the content creator strategists, they say, don't shift it. Don't go all over the place. Stick to what you know, stick to the thing you're known for. But we're whole people and we have all these things that we're interested in. And really our most creative work always comes out of a life really well lived, right? And so I can honestly say Ruth Joe Simons, early 2000s was living a lot of life, living and living a lot of life. That turned into me writing about a lot of life. And that's what early gracelace.com, the blog, was all about. So much life lived. I was writing notes from the field as a ministry, a pastor's wife. I was writing about our school that we founded, the Classical Christian Hybrid School that we were founders of. I was writing about having a fourth and a fifth and a sixth son when really I wasn't even sure I wanted that many kids. I was writing about those kinds of things because that was the overflow of what I was actually living. And sometimes I would blog a little bit about recipes and sometimes I would write about sewing projects. Any OGers out there, if you're an OGer, leave a comment or something because I'm dying to know. But you remember the many outlets for my creativity. I would sometimes paint, sometimes write, sometimes cook, sometimes sew things. I mean, I really went through a sewing phase, guys. At one point, I think I was like, just as an aside, I know I'm getting derailed, but at one point, I was literally making like tutus. for like baby girls, because Ann Getty like photos, portraits. Does anyone remember that? Am I a boomer? I am, I think. I mean, like that was super popular to put your baby in a little tutu in some kind of really awkward floral setup so that she looked like a flower herself, you know? And so, I had no little girls. And so I was like vicariously living through all these tutus that other people's baby girls were experiencing. And so I went through a whole phase like that. But back to the point. Um, I I was doing so much out of just that. I can't wait to create. And so much so that sometimes y'all ask me like, what was it like when you founded Grace Lace? How did it start? And one of my keys to success at in that season was that I never watched TV. Like I always talk about this. I always go, gosh, between like 2013 to, you know, 2020, I would say even now, I mean, I can't tell you what's on TV at all. I can't tell you what's on Netflix. I literally don't know because I spent so much time every moment that I had that wasn't with training my kids or cooking dinner or doing homework, I'd be honing my craft. So then you fast forward to a season that I'm super grateful for. I'm so grateful I get to write books. I'm so grateful that I get to speak and share and teach live the content that I have worked on and that I care so deeply about. I'm so grateful that you all love books with words in it and books with words and art. I don't know how I get to do all of that. You know, I'm so grateful that I paint for my own full color books. But it does mean, and I'm super grateful that I still run a company called gracelace.com where my artwork is made into lots of beautiful products and resources and lifestyle products that you get to take around with you or hang up in your home or use around the house. I'm grateful for all of it. But if you're asking the question, Ruth, how do you do all that? The two things I would say is one, I definitely don't do it all. And I have a designer, I have a team, I have people in the publishing who do so much of the behind the scenes work to get my artwork and my words ready to publish. But the second thing I would say is kind of what we're talking about today is how to create rhythms that make for sustainable creativity. What are those sustainable rhythms? You really could say it both ways. What are the rhythms for sustainable creativity and what are sustainable rhythms for creativity? Because both kind of get to the heart of the issue. The heart of the issue is our most creative and innovative and life-giving work as creatives come out of a life well lived or out of margin that makes it possible for us to have creative thoughts. And so one of the things that I really came to and realized, because I don't think I shared that much about it on social media, I will soon, but I was painting for a very long time. And it was just a little too soon to share some of it, but I can't wait to show you all how much I was painting last fall and why I was painting and where that painting is going to arrive in your hands. That work was beautiful, tremendous, and I loved it. But as I was painting, I was grinding. Like that's the best way I can put it. Um, okay, throw in there on top of it, I was waylaid by our family's accident with my Man Cub 3, Judah's mountain biking accident. If you've been listening to podcasts, you can go back a few episodes and hear about that. But in the middle of these deadlines, we went through a major trauma. So that obviously set us back as well and made the funnel even tighter so that getting to the finish line was so hard and so tight. And so one of the things that I really learned and realized through that whole season of grinding and making sure that these paintings were done was that I can do really beautiful work when I'm forced to do it, when the deadline calls for it. I am an excellent a deliverer. Like I can deliver. I will not fail you. I will get it done. But the joy is either going to be the joy is going to be affected. My creativity will be affected because forcing something through in a smaller period of time, you have to do a lot to create the kind of margin it takes to have really creative thoughts. So what you're going to see in time as a result of all that painting kind of required a lot of sacrifice. It required so much sacrifice of other things that I needed to do in order to create margin so that that creativity could actually flow, so that that joy could actually be there, because nobody wants to see the work that comes out of misery or out of, um, like, I'm forcing this to happen. That's not your best work. And so in order to have that, you have to create those margins. And so the lessons I'm learning through that have brought me to this episode where I'm going to share with you some of five different rhythms that were in place. Some of those rhythms were more or less in place at the time, or they quickly had to be in place in order for me to create. But now in retrospect, I go, okay, I am not going to let that kind of pressure force me to create um, in a very bound way anymore. Like, I want to create more freely. What do I need to do to be somebody with creative stamina, with creative energy, with a sustainable rhythm that allows me to keep on running the race with endurance, right? You all remember me talking a few episodes back about how in Hebrews 12 we read about the race that we're running with endurance. How do we do that? How do we keep our eyes on Jesus? Well, I'm going to give you my five specific, not too spiritual, but very practical rhythms that are helping me currently create sustainable rhythms in my life so that I can actually stay creative, because I don't want to burn out. I don't want to be miserable. I don't want to create things that were written or painted in agony or without joy. So in order for that not to happen, these rhythms had to be in place while I was creating all that. But also as I go forward, I'm like, these are non-negotiables. Okay, so here we go. Number one, I got to limit my content consumption. So this one, I think these first two have been in place for a while, but I'm bringing these up as ones that I'm continuing working on all the time. Limit content consumption. That primarily for me is through my phone and through social media, but it can be also other things. It could be, spending time just on Netflix or on any of the platforms that provide content, right? Back in the day, this could be just scrolling through a lot of um, books or magazines or anything that is not really for anything but like, oh, I hope I can get inspired. There's a fine line between like getting some inspiration, but then also consuming and consuming and consuming actually robs me of creative energy. So my first one is limit content consumption, which ultimately is at some level also about putting boundaries on when I'm on my phone, how I'm using my phone, and how much I'm allowing that doom scrolling to be a part of my life, which really should not be a part of my life. But just in all honesty, I think sometimes when we're tired, sometimes when we're trying to get inspired, it's so easy to just consume and consume and consume. So that's number one. I'm continually on um, I'm continually curating a rhythm of how to limit that content consumption. And then number two is to curate what you consume. And so if the number one was to limit your content consumption, number two is curate who you follow, what you're consuming. And so one of the things I say often is that as an artist and even an author, let's start with art. As a painter, I am careful not to follow or consume too much content by people doing the exact same things that I'm doing. As in, if I'm painting watercolor flowers, if I'm watching other people paint watercolor flowers all day long, I'm really not going to have a fresh thought in my brain. I'm going to be constantly aware of how somebody else is doing it and probably feel miserable about my skills, probably feel inadequate with my ideas. And every time I go to think about a new idea, I'm going to be thinking about what I saw that somebody else has done. Do you know what I'm talking about? Has that ever happened to you? In the same way, I think even with reading and writing, it's good to read good books. But I actually limit how much I consume. I know this is kind of sad and difficult, but because I don't have a lot of time to read, I don't read a lot of my friends' books. I don't read a lot of my contemporaries because I might love my friends, but if I'm reading the words that are being written right around me in the same context, and then it's just hard to have a new thought in my mind because the way I say it might sound just like somebody else, or the analogy that comes to mind, I might not think of a new analogy because I'm hearing somebody else teach it better or say it their way. And so a lot of times what helps me is to actually go to earlier sources. So as in like, I think I've said this before, but Troy always likes to say, if you love to read Tolkien, well, go and think of who Tolkien was influenced by. Or, a contemporary would be, I grew up in a generation that read a lot of John Piper. Well, Piper was incredibly influenced by Augustine or um, C.S. Lewis or Spurgeon, or and so I'm I'm not citing any resources here. I'm just saying in general, those are some of the influences. There were a lot more influences, but if you want to be influenced deeply by people you really admire, respect, it's really helpful just to go to those original sources. And so things like that, where I find that if I want to be creative, it's helpful for me not to actually follow all the people who I might want to emulate, but to be inspired by things that might be inspiring them or things that inspire me outside of anybody I want to emulate. So number one was limit content consumption. Number two was curate what you consume and who you follow. And then number three is, it's not going to surprise you. For me, it's be exposed or influenced by God's handiwork. So specifically nature, God's handiwork. You probably have heard me say this before, but one of the best ways I can keep a sustainable rhythm for creative output is if I take my eyes off of my own work every day and go get really amazed and mesmerized by God's work. I think anyone can do that. I'm a broken record for saying this, but if this is the first time you've ever heard me say it, welcome to the things that I say repeatedly. But I always say everybody has access to sunrise and sunset. It doesn't matter where you live. Even if you're living surrounded by skyscrapers, there's there's access to the skies and the heavens and the birds chirping in the trees, or the little leaves that unfurl when winter's past and spring is on its way. Everybody has access to these little moments. It doesn't matter if you live in Montana or in Hawaii, or you might have more access to God's creation in the beautiful wild, but we all have access to the stars at night and the sunrise and the sunset. And I'm reminded, I just pulled up Psalm 19:1, such a familiar verse, but I'll read it to us. This is in the ESV. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. And so I think for us as creatives, it's so easy for us to be so consumed by our own handiwork. I know I am. I'm constantly like looking at how good, like, is this good? Did I create something good? Am I amazing? And I'm not trying to win an Oscar or be so amazing. It's just that I'm trying so hard to be really great at what I do. And we should be. We bring glory to God when we're excellent at what we do. I'm not trying to be mediocre, right? Ruth Joe Simons is trying to be a solid, wonderful, biblically sound author that happens to paint beautiful things that you can experience on a different level. I want to be that. But I have to take my eyes off of my work if it's going to be sustainable, if I don't want to burn out, if I don't want to rely on my own hands and on my own work. And so Psalm 91 reminds me that God puts all around us displays of his handiwork, that there's declaration after declaration, sun up to sundown, of God saying, hey, look at me. Look what I've done. I'm the best creator. I'm the original creator. I'm the best artist there is. And I'm reminded all the time that every color I'm trying to pick out of the Pantone colors, every color I'm trying to like get with the eyedropper and edit a certain color. We didn't make those colors up. God did. Every color is reflected in everything that He has made. And so if I want to have a sustainable rhythm of creativity, I actually have to work into the rhythm, being wowed by God, being wowed by His handiwork. Okay. Number 4. You're not going to be surprised by this one yet either, but part of my rhythm is that I have to rest. Um, I really do. I mean, as practical as it sounds, I find that my brain is foggy and I don't have any creative thoughts. And then I spiral into, I'm such a failure and I can't think of anything cool and everybody hates me. Some stupid cycle of negative thoughts when I don't sleep, And so whether that means that you're taking some magnesium or you're taking some melatonin or you get your hormones balanced, those are all true and wonderful things. But also, it might mean that you just have to turn your phone off earlier and choose to start heading towards bed. Like if I don't start thinking about heading toward bed at 9:30, I don't get in bed by 10ish, and then I don't fall asleep until, you know what I'm saying? And so maybe it means that you buy some light blocking drapes. I mean, some things are not rocket science. It's like you sleep better when it's darker. Or Troy tries to tell me this all the time because he's just more crunchy than I am. I don't even know if crunchy is the right way to put it, but he has, like, for the majority of our marriage, worn, oh my gosh, can't believe I'm going to say this on the podcast, but we joke and call them birth control glasses because they're like super, like, horrible to, like, he does not look attractive to me in them at all because they're light blocking, but they're like orangey, weird, huge visor ones. And we laugh all the time. He doesn't wear those. He has better ones now. But at the time, he would wear those before it was popular, before people were saying, like, hey, you really don't need to not have that light in your eyeballs at night. Before it was popular to talk about that, he was already blocking out the light for his sleep. I'm a little late to the game. I'm only now kind of more like, oh, I need to not have my phone on for any reason that late at night. So, just true confessions of things that truly do affect my creativity. I think we underestimate how much sleep and rest makes a difference. We're not giving ourselves enough time to repair and to rest and to give our brains time to, like, really reset. Um, I've been known, because I'm such a hustler, I've been known to think that if I just stay up another hour or two, I'll come up with brilliant ideas, especially if I'm scrolling and reading and looking and, I don't know, checking out more websites or doing more things or doing more research. And it actually causes me to sleep anxiously. I feel anxious at night. I wake up in the middle of the night with anxious thoughts because I went to bed thinking about all these things. And so, whatever it looks like for you, find some time to rest, and actually get enough sleep to be creative. That's part of my sustaining rhythms. And then finally, this is kind of just full circle back to what I was describing earlier. Excuse me. The fifth sustainable rhythm is to create for the joy of it. And I think this is meant to be more than just an ideal, but it's the hardest one. It's the hardest one for me to practically implement because it's so easy. Okay, water break. It's so easy to imagine that your best work is going to come out of just doing more and creating more. Practice does make perfect, and practice makes progress. And that's true. But I think we underestimate how much um, real progress and real productivity actually flows out of returning to the love, returning to the joy, and being so filled up by the very thing that brought you to that creative endeavor in the first place. that um, you can't help but overflow into all these things that seem productive. So, do you see the difference? Rather than aiming for productivity and forcing yourself and your creative efforts and skills through that narrow filter of like, I gotta squeeze this out of this small little funnel, is to say, I want to overflow with so much because I fueled the tank. I filled myself up. I am painting for the joy of it. For example, as an artist, one of my goals for 2025 is to create enough margin that I paint things and I create things that nobody ever sees, even that may not ever get sold, that don't make a difference for any of the projects I'm doing. But I just really enjoy the process. Maybe it's learning something new. Maybe it's saying, rather than I'm going to take this workshop on how to make more money doing the thing I love, or I'm going to not spend money investing in trying to get ahead in this craft, but maybe it's just taking a class and enjoying it. I mean, is it crazy? But maybe you should take a ceramics class just because you've always wanted to play with clay and create. Maybe it won't make you any money. Maybe it's not your career move. Maybe it's going to cost you a little, but it will get your creative juices going. Maybe you need to take piano lessons. You're not going to be the church accompanist. You're not going to become a recording artist. Maybe you won't even be able to ever play what you really want to play. You're not going to be like some jazz, you know, performer. But just taking the class or just practicing piano after not playing for 2 decades may very well trigger some new creative juices, might cause you to feel inspired in a new way. And if nothing else, fills you up in a different way. I find so often that we just underestimate how much we were made for beauty and made for joy. God could have created us to not have tears come to our eyes when we hear powerful music. But we cry when we see beautiful images, powerful music. We are moved by really well done creative pieces. God could have created us where we don't notice when something is incredibly beautiful or extraordinary to behold. We know when something is done so meticulously and so beautifully with such detail that you can't help but just go, wow, that is reflecting like the amazing like creativity of God, that a human being can even create this. And so I guess I'm just saying, we forget that it has to start with what's on the inside. I mean, I'm not trying to be put a spiritual answer on it, but the reality is, we live in such a highly productive. We live in a world where we measure everything by output, and output is always connected with revenue, and revenue is always connected to success or favor. And so, if you think about it, if we live in a world where we don't know where to find favor and approval and love and worth, we're going to keep chasing success and um, an achievement for our self worth. And the only way you can find success and achievement as your base of self worth is if you create a lot of output that other people want you to do. And so I guess I'm just saying, friend, start where no one else can see. Start where nobody else knows that you are wrestling with things like favor, approval, love, belonging, those kinds of things that we're really longing for. Start there and ask yourself, how much of my creative output is because I'm looking for those things? I'm looking for belonging and someone's affection. I'm looking for success. I'm looking for affirmation that I am worth something. And if that's true, that you're doing a lot of output because of that, I would just plead with you to turn your eyes to Jesus and find your worth and belonging and acceptance and joy in who he is and who he made you to be. We are his workmanship, Ephesians 2:10, created for good works beforehand that we should walk in them. That because of Jesus, we're made on purpose for a purpose. And we don't have to freak out trying to figure out if we have a purpose here on earth. He did create us on purpose for a purpose, but it's not because we're so amazing. We need to walk in it because of grace through faith in him. And so it really does start with us. And I'm saying it to myself. It does start with us resetting our goals and our motivation for being creative in the first place. And then these 5 rhythms, I hope they're of value and of service to you, because once you tap into what's really motivating you, if you can get real honest about that, then you can start making some of these decisions about your rhythms, because you won't be crafting your day based on whether or not somebody will like you enough, or whether or not you're going to be successful on Instagram, or whether or not you're going to generate this kind of income. All those things are important. I'm not saying don't worry about those things. I'm just saying those are secondary issues in your stewardship of your gifts. Whether you're successful, whether you sell things, whether you provide whatever, all those things are necessary for your job. But the most important thing is to say, the master artist, God himself, created me to reflect his creativity. And so how I use my day and how I create sustainable rhythms to reflect his creativity, that will impact ultimately every kind of output that I desire in my life. So once again, limit content consumption. These are just mine. I'm just offering them to you. Limit content consumption. Curate what you consume and who you follow. Number 3, be exposed or influenced by God's handiwork. Just let God's handiwork be a part of your daily rhythm. Rest, like actually physically rest. And then number 5, create for the joy of it. Create enough margin. Actually prioritize it enough that you spend time creating in ways that are not just for social media, not just to make money, but to return to the very ways in which God's wired you to be creative. So there you have it. Those are 5 things that I am working into my daily, weekly, monthly rhythms. Am I perfect at them? No, for sure not. I mean, regularly I have to stop and go, okay, wow, I have just been hustling, or I just went through a season where I'm like really grinding it out and it's not coming out of the overflow of my heart. So I've got to return to some rest. I've got to move toward some margin where I am creating because God wired me to create this way. So for me, namely, it's that I'm committed to, and it started last fall, but I'm committed to creating paintings and writing that always flows out of where I already am, not that I'm forcing work to come because I have to create it. And so that's something I'm just committed to in myself and working towards in the days ahead too, because those projects will keep coming, those deadlines will keep coming. And so how I choose to protect my creativity will really matter. So I guess my question to you is, in what way has God created you to be creative? Don't think of it just as like being an artist or a musician or a dancer. How are you creative? What is the output in your life that feels demanding and feels never ending? What is that output? And how do you create a sustainable rhythm so that you can continue to be creative, so that the output reflects what's actually happening on the inside in a good way? Um, and I'm curious, are you going to adopt any of these 5 rhythms? If you are, I'd love to hear about it. Share this episode with a friend who may need this encouragement as well. Leave me a comment if you're on YouTube. Send this episode if you're on social media. And I'd sure love to hear from you if you write in. I want to know what of these 5 or all 5, how are they going for you? And what things are you implementing and how is it making a difference? So I'm cheering for you. I'm cheering you on. I hope you're encouraged by a vulnerable conversation here, being honest about how to fight the good fight as a creative in a world that doesn't really value what's going on in the inside and is just demanding more output. Let us be those who guard our hearts and make sure that we are truly looking to Jesus and letting the outflow of our lives be creative, fruitful, and so reflective of his creativity. Have a great day, friends. We'll talk to you soon. Love y'all.